Thanks for tuning in today on our episode here. I have a special guest today. Her name is Cindy Kuzma, and she is a freelance writer, author, and podcaster. You might recognize her name if you are a runner and a subscriber to Runner's World magazine like myself, because she is a frequent contributor to Runner's World women's running and other sports and fitness magazines and publications. She's also written a lot of books, and that's actually how I kind of stumbled upon getting to know Cindy. So she's written one book called Rebound, Train Your Mind to Bounce Back Stronger from Sports Injuries, which I will get into. And she also, I have her newest book here in my lap called Breakthrough in Women's Running, which she co-authored with Neely Spence Gracie, who's a elite runner. So we were just talking about this book before we started the episode. So we're really happy to have you here, Cindy. Thanks for joining us today. And I just wanted to introduce you guys to Cindy. I actually met her through social media. I recognized her name, but it was one of those things like, where do I know her from? And then I put all the Runner's World stuff together. But 3 years ago now, if I kind of do the math, I don't know, COVID years to me, I know before you kind of go through, like, I'm not real sure where the time went. I think it was 3 years ago, might have been, I think, is when I had a pretty significant injury and stumbled upon a Facebook group that was for support for injured athletes. And those of you, we have a lot of athletes that listen, and those of you who are athletes know, some people get an injury and they're like, oh, well, I can't, work out for a couple weeks. Oh, well, no big deal. But those of us who pretty much live and breathe this stuff, it is much different than that. And it can feel soul crushing, life changing. So you can slip into a lot of mental health and depression and anxiety. I think I experienced all of the above. And so I stumbled upon this group. It was very helpful. It was really just a support group, but Cindy was there to just offer support and guidance and let us know that we are not defined by our injuries and we're not defined by our sport of choice, and that there is another side somewhere. And it's really hard to remember that when you're in the midst of PT and doctors and pain. So that is kind of why I brought Cindy on today, and I'm going to try not to talk over her too much. But my biggest thing here was to first have Cindy tell us like how she came to be this support person for injured runners and athletes herself. So, Cindy, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and what kind of brought you into this field of study?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Mandy. It's, I just love that you found us when you needed us, and that we've been able to stay connected for all this time, even now that you are currently an uninjured athlete. So that makes us very happy. Not currently, like you say, it's kind of it's a part of the sport, and so that's our motivation behind the Injured Athletes Club and the book Rebound and all of the things that my co-author and co-president of the Injured Athletes Club, Carrie Jackson, who is a mental skills coach. Our whole goal is to kind of normalize this for people and let them know that they're not alone, that this is an almost inevitable part of the athletic experience, and that there are ways to help yourself through it, or ways to reach out and get support through it. And in fact, if you approach it right, you can even come out of it stronger on the other side in many ways. And I believe that you have experienced this, but I certainly have. So I have been a freelance journalist for full-time freelance for about 10 years now, and I've been a runner for about 20 years. And I went to undergrad and graduate school for journalism and had a number of jobs in the field, always writing about kind of health and science and that sort of thing. And the more I got into running, the more I started writing about running. And because I am just a recreational athlete who's not super genetically talented or biomechanically gifted, I wound up having a lot of injuries, and I learned a lot from them through the years. But one of my editors once told me something I've never forgotten, which is that journalists don't have problems, they have story ideas. So as I was getting injured through the years, writing more and more about running and fitness, I would write about injury. And I realized that were a lot of psychological aspects to getting injured and recovering from injury. And I didn't really see anyone else talking or writing about that. So I started writing about it a little bit and reached out to some expert sources, as I always do when I'm writing an article. And one of the sources that I talked to many times, because she specializes in working on the psychological side of injury, was Carrie. And so we had talked several times for articles. And then back in 2017, I think, I'd have to double check the year exactly. I think that's right, because I think the whole process took us about 2 years before the book came out. We talked a few times for articles. I had collaborated with a dietitian on a book before. I was interested in doing another book. I thought this was a topic that was really important and not well covered. And Carrie posted something on social media that said, oh, I have a big project coming up and, something. And I was like, I wonder if she's thinking about writing a book, and I wonder if this is the book that she would write, because someone needs to write this book. And then I was like, I wonder if she would want to collaborate on it. So I reached out to her, and that was exactly what her plan was. And she considered the idea of collaborating. I basically invited her to a book retreat she had planned for herself in Asheville, North Carolina. I was like, hey, what if we're both on the phone, and we had never met in person. And I was like, what if I was thinking, will it be weird if I invite myself? And little did I know she was thinking, would it be weird if I invited her, even though we've never met? So I don't remember which one of us said it first,
so
but we made that happen. I went and stayed at her Airbnb in Asheville for a few days, and we put together the outline that became Rebound. And the more we talked, the more we were like, how does this book not exist already? I mean, that, as you were just saying, injury is a psychological experience as well as a physical experience. And athletes get a lot of guidance on the physical side and not as much on the mental side. So, so that's kind of how the book and then the podcast, our podcast is also called the Injured Athletes Club, but our podcast and our Facebook support group and all of that kind of was born at that time. So.
And I actually, for those listening, I did have a copy of Rebound, and I actually gave it to a friend as a gift who was injured after me. So I got it when I found you guys, and I read it, and I think I read it in like one sitting. Actually, it's what happens when you're injured. You sit and read a lot. So I gifted it, which I felt like was the right thing to do at the time. So, there's a couple running books that I have gifted to people when they've needed it. And yours is one of them. So there's only a couple. We were talking about this before I started the show about, there's a lot of running books out there. I think I have almost all of them. And I would say 90% of them I don't talk about, I don't gift, I don't recommend. And, I actually did give Rebound away, so that's a good thing for you guys.
No, thank you for that, because
that's good. And how did you guys, like, when you were writing Rebound, did you collaborate in terms of, obviously she had worked on the mental side with her clients, I'm guessing. Did you go in from a personal angle, from like the injuries and stuff you had experienced as a runner, or did you guys go out and research outside of yourselves?
Certainly the idea and many of the principles were, formulated by our personal experiences, but we definitely did a lot of research too. Carrie, like you said, has been practicing in the field, and she certainly already had folders and folders full of research that she, kept up to date on, so that she could implement that in the findings from the research in her practice. But we delved even deeper into the research as we were putting them together. And then I interviewed more than 40 athletes. So it was a lot of work, but well worth it, because then you could really start to see, it's one thing to read the research, but it's another thing. Yeah, exactly. So we could really start to see it was another kind of research, right? And then it also allowed us to tell athlete stories in the book in a way that made the research come to life a little bit more, and helped us give examples of what athletes at all levels had gone through and how they had navigated that really difficult time.
Sure. Sure. So this is gonna, I know, go a little bit off, not really, but if you had to just summarize like your top suggestions for athletes who may be listening to this injured, and it could go from, I work with a lot of triathletes, but you can get injured in all three disciplines. So what would be your recommendations from the research you've done and the interviews you've done and everything like that?
Yeah. Well, I think the number one thing is that first, know that it is okay to be upset. It's to feel your feelings. Whatever your sport is, you have put a lot of time and effort and dedication into it, and it is completely understandable that you would be upset when injury happens. It is not what you planned. It's not what you want, and I think a lot of times athletes, because most of the athletes I know are like really great people. And so they always try to think, oh, well, gosh, so many other people have it worse. Like I shouldn't be upset about this. Or sometimes they blame themselves for their injury, or there's so many emotions that come up right at first. And I think it's just like really important to just like let those like sit in those at first, like give yourself time to wallow, give yourself time to be upset, to blame yourself, to blame your coach, to blame your running shoes, to blame whatever it is that you need to do. Like if you don't feel those emotions at first, they're going to come back at some point. So, there's a time and a place for putting things in context and accepting your reality and moving on. But at first it's just like, you gotta feel those. And if you have trouble with that, like we have the great thing about Rebound, in addition to the athlete stories, we have all of these mental skills and drills. So like actual exercises that Carrie uses with her clients all the time to help people with these processes. So journaling is a great way to do it. Just writing it, sitting in your room, crying, ice cream, sad music, like whatever you need to do. We have something called an emotion decoder in there where you just like circle all of the emotions that you're feeling. And so that I always say that first, like, and then the second thing, once you kind of get through that period, then you do have to come to some sort of acceptance. And I think, one of the pieces of advice that we give in the book that I think resonates with people a lot is to recognize that you are an athlete. You are still an athlete, and recovery is now your sport. So all of the time and energy and effort that you were putting into your training, you have a huge advantage as an athlete in that you know how to dedicate yourself to a goal. So for now, your goal is your recovery, and all of the things that you had in place to achieve your athletic goals, you can now harness those skills, that motivation, and put it toward achieving your goal of recovery. So it's hard to do. It's hard to adjust those goals. You're never going to heal as fast as you want because you don't want to be injured in the first place. But the most successful athletes that we see get to the point where they can adjust their goals. They can, we see people do incredible things like put together recovery plans that look just like their training plans. But, like instead of whatever, I'm not a triathlete, I'm not a swimmer, so I don't know like the distance that you might swim in a workout. But like instead of a 30-minute swim, I have a 30-minute aqua jog, or whatever it is that just replacing the things that you would do for your training with things you do for your recovery. Keep it logged like that. Track it the same way. Celebrate when you achieve goals. So those are two really big ones. Feel your feelings, and then know that you're still an athlete, and recovery is now your sport.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you mentioned those two things because outside of being an athlete and coach, I am a therapist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I say feel your feelings every single day. And it is very important. And I even said, outside of, it's with anything in life, grief. And I honestly think, as you were explaining, like being injured is kind of like a grieving process, even though you may not be, hopefully, most likely, you're not done with your sport forever. But you're still grieving the loss of wherever you were at right now. So like, most of us, if we get injured, are missing something, like whether it's a key workout or a race that we've signed up for. When I got injured significantly, I lost a 70.3 Ironman, that I had registered for. There was no deferral. It was too late for a refund, so I lost a $350 70.3, but so you grieve that there was nothing I could do to get that back. It's gone away, right? So you have to feel your feelings, and it is what you said is absolutely true. You feel guilty for being so upset about something that's not. There are a lot of things going on in the world right now that are like much bigger and scarier than an injured hamstring or a stress fracture, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. And I think that is important for us all to remember. The last few years as we've gone through this pandemic, for example, like it doesn't matter if you're upset about not having groceries, like you're allowed to be upset about it. So feel your feelings. And when she mentions, you guys, about the journal thing or scheduling your recovery, I'm laughing because if you would have seen my Training Peaks, that is the app that I use. There's other apps out there. Final Surge is a big one for runners, and but I use Training Peaks for it's where all my training goes into, and my schedule. And when I still had in there every day, like, for a while it literally was like do your 20 minutes of stretches. And then it was go for your 20-minute walk, PT. And then I would increase my walking until I could do, but I put all of it in there. And it may seem silly to some of you guys listening to this, but like Cindy said, it kept me motivated, because what did I check every single day when I was training regularly? Training Peaks. So I would open it up. What do I got to do today? Oh, I have, 800s, or, oh, I have to go, I'm going to get on my trainer and do a 60-minute VO2 threshold ride, and I couldn't do that for a couple months. And so I would put in there my PT and my hour-long walks. Eventually I did work up to an hour, and it still gave me something on a schedule to do. And I continued to get back, to stay on track. So I 100% agree with you with that. On both accounts, I think that looking back on it, my husband told me many times, if I had this injury, I would have just laid on the couch and not done anything. And he told me when I would be so upset about, everything, it wasn't going fast enough. As you know, nothing's ever fast enough. And, but I kept showing up. I'd still go to the PT. I would be on the floor doing all my little stretches. I would, I was going for walks even when things hurt, because that was what helped it get better. That's what they recommended that I do, and I did not lose hope. I refused to believe that I wasn't going to be able to run again. So, yeah, what she said is absolutely true, you guys. So, I just a student, I guess, because it's been a few years since I read Rebound, and I'm like, I probably did that because you told me to do that, but it worked. I can say that it worked. And so, definitely, if anyone's listening to this that's struggling, like, do remember that. Do remember that your recovery is your sport for the moment. So one thing I wanted to bring up is I did notice when I was reading the newer book that even you mentioned, all these elite athletes are going to have, all athletes, not even just elite athletes, are going to have some sort of injury at some time, sometime in their career. And Neely, in your newer book, when you read the first chapter, what does she talk about? Getting injured. This isn't even an injury book. This is not an injury prevention book or like this isn't Rebound, and I just think that's what she talks about. And guess what, guys? She came back and still ran like a 2.5-hour marathon or something crazy. So she broke her hip and did something crazy.
Yeah, she had a hard time postpartum, and that was, so she had a stress fracture in her hip after that. So yeah.
Did she? Yeah. So on that, what can you tell us? What brought you to go from Rebound?
Sure.
To this
so I mean, philosophically speaking, I think what you say is really interesting, because I definitely saw a through line between these two books for sure. In addition to Neely, we profile. I mean, there's a lot of, because the book is co-authored with Neely, and Yeah, right. We have a lot
Molly
of other
Huddle's in
athletes
there.
in there.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's a dozen total. Not quite as many as I interviewed for Rebound, but each chapter ends with an athlete profile, and nearly all of them, when we asked them, talked about a setback, usually an injury that they faced as well. So, again, and we have a whole chapter. We have a chapter about injury prevention in there, but we also have a chapter about just setbacks in general and how to reset after you have one. And really what we noticed in talking to those other athletes and from Neely's experience as both an athlete and a coach, because she's coached hundreds of athletes at this point, that often the biggest breakthroughs come after a setback. So to me, that's like the definition of a rebound, right? You have a setback and you bounce back stronger, and there's your breakthrough. So to me, there was, even though they seem in some ways not so connected, there really was a through line in these two books. Logistically, how they came together, how this book came together was our publisher, Human Kinetics, came to me. I had met their acquisitions editor at an event, and we kind of kept in touch through the years. And Human Kinetics has published a lot of other great running books. Advanced Marathoning, they published Run Happy, which is by my coach, Megan Roach, and her husband, David Roach, which is a book I love. And Megan Roach is in our book, too. And so anyway, I kept in touch with this editor, Michelle, through the years, and she reached out to me at one point a couple years ago and said, hey, we really think that there needs to be a training book that's written for women runners by women runners. We don't really see anything out there like that right now. We have, Jack Daniels, we have Pete Fitzinger, we have a lot of other great training books, but we'd like to see this. And would you want to work on it? And if so, would you want to pair with an expert, and which expert would you want to pair with? So I said that sounded like a great idea, and I knew just the person. And Neely, once again, I had interviewed her as a source for articles for Runner's World and other publications through the years, and really respected how she had the perspective of an elite athlete and a coach, and she really knew the science, but she was able to speak about it in a way that was really personable, and she really connected with her athletes on a personal and emotional level. And so that's kind of how that came to be. And so that we started it just before the pandemic started. We're kind of working on it through the pandemic, which was an interesting experience because we're writing about how to have your best race, and there are no races. But we had hope. We had hope that one day there would be. And it also was fascinating too, because she got pregnant again, unplanned, while we were working on the book, which I think ended up, she ended up, obviously she was surprised and happy. I mean, she wanted another child, but she wasn't really expecting it at that time. So she almost had a similar, and she talks about this in the book, and I give her so much credit for being open about it, but she had a similar process to work through of like grieving what she was just finally getting back into fitness. And she really thought she was going to have a great race at the Marathon Project in December of 2020. And she couldn't run because she was pregnant. And so even though she was so happy about it, she went through the process of grieving what she'd lost there too. But her pregnancies were so different, and having two experiences gave us even more great information and insight to share in the book. Yeah.
I was going to say, gave a really good topic. And that I'm sure you guys thought about this too, but it just got me thinking as you're talking that, we talk about injuries and with athletes, and obviously that applies to both men and women alike. But as women who like to be in sport, we have this other thing that happens to us if we choose to have children. And having gone through two pregnancies myself, in childbirth, it changes your body and leaves you with a pelvic floor that will never quite be like it was before childbirth. And that adds a whole new host of things add into your running injury prevention stuff. So this book, for those with this breakthrough book, has a whole chapter on staying fit through your pregnancy if you are already a runner. And how to listen to your body. I mean, you guys mentioned this in the book, but I don't know about you, Cindy, but My first daughter, I could not run. Like I would try and I would have shooting pain immediately. So I just stopped. So it wasn't going to happen. Wasn't going to happen, but I did stay active through both of them. I did the elliptical machine. I could do the spin bike for a while, until that wasn't comfortable to sit like that because I'm 5 foot tall, so my stomach literally took up my entire body. But the elliptical and the pool were my best friends. So, but yeah, anyways, I just think that's interesting when you think about injuries and setbacks as an athlete. You add in children, and that's all. Gosh, we could talk about that all day, right? Because there's like the physical aspect, then there's the whole other aspect. So, yeah, you see it for sure. And I hate to call it a setback because I think there's this like stereotype that once we have babies that like our athletic careers are just kind of done, we'll never be this, never peak the same. And all I'm going to tell you guys, I'm not a professional athlete, but I didn't do an Ironman until after I had kids. So go figure, right? So didn't run a marathon until after I had kids. So
Yeah.
that doesn't have to necessarily be. You can do it afterwards. So I know I kind of got off on a tangent there, but it just got me thinking that her being pregnant, she had all these injuries before she even had babies, and then add in something.
Yeah,
that was
no,
supposed
it's
to
so
be a
true.
joyous
And so
thing.
I don't have children myself, but so which is makes it even more fascinating for me to work with Neely on this. And it was to be, kind of hearing her go through it was really interesting. And her two pregnancies also were super different. The first one, she could not run at all. She was in pain. She felt sick all the time. And then just, really, she had a hard time, honestly, staying very active at all. And then her comeback was really hard. And her second pregnancy was just completely different. She felt so much better. She was able to run right up until she gave birth. She was doing workouts until I think 14 weeks or something like that, or a time that she and her doctor agreed was safe. She was doing, fartlek workouts. And so just her having those two experiences and being the same athlete, I think really, we were already writing because we knew from the research and from the other athletes we talked to that every pregnancy is different, but she could really know that truly from experience. And it's interesting that you say that too. And I'd be curious, Mandy, like what your experience was with, comparing like coming back after pregnancy to coming back from an injury, because I think that sometimes we are told that it will be similar, but my understanding is that it's not for so many reasons. That there's the injury component. Obviously, there are physical changes to your body, but then you're not the same person afterwards. And, which makes sense and is, I think, a good thing. So, yeah, but.
Yep. Yep. You change time management. Yeah, time management. I mean, I literally, that's when I started running with a jogging stroller. I mean, and I couldn't run with a jogging. I couldn't even run until she was old enough to put in the jogging stroller, which was like 6 months, because you can't, we had a treadmill. We bought a treadmill when after I had my baby, but it was, I mean, even that, I mean, I can tell you, Cindy, I would be like, okay, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna get up and work out before the baby's awake. Well, the babies don't have an alarm clock, so half the time they would be up, at different times, or I would get up and then they would wake up 10 minutes into my run, or they would be up 17 times in the middle of the night. So I was so tired. I couldn't do it. Or when I was breastfeeding my second baby, I couldn't run until I nursed her. Like physically, it would be excruciating if I tried. So there were just a host. I mean, there were so many things that would happen, and just, it was way different. I didn't even think about doing a race until they were 2, I think. I can't even remember. I feel like my kids are so much older now, but there's a reason for me. I mean, as a non-elite athlete, I mean, I put obviously in a different place than someone like Neely, who was getting paid to run races, right? But I purposely waited to even train for an Ironman that I knew had so many hours of training until my kids were in school and old enough that if I was gone for 8 hours on a Saturday, which I was, to go on a bike ride, that they wouldn't really care,
Yeah.
to be honest with you, because it's such a huge time commitment. So there was no, and marathon training is a little better. At least time management wise, because you can get up. I mean, your longest run's 3 hours. For most people, that's generally the max, and you can get up at 6 a.m. You can get up and get back before lunchtime. But even then, I mean, it's just anyways, I could go, but yeah, it is different. When there was an injury, you are generally given a timeline. You're given a plan. I mean, yeah, it could vary here and there, but parenting and pregnancy, you can try to plan. I laugh because it's funny to me because I had all of those books that said baby scheduling, and that's funny. Baby scheduling. Yeah. Okay, best wishes. Good luck. That's all I have to say about that. Good luck with that baby schedule. Yeah. Because yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's totally different. But I do think, gosh, we have I think we, as a woman, we do have some double whammies there.
Yeah, but I think your point is an excellent one. And I mean, I think even if you look at elite runners, these days, so many of them are running well after having kids. And in fact, it seems to give them the deeper motivation to do so. So I think, now that, things are changing, not quickly enough, but things are changing to kind of give female athletes the support they need to do that. And any athlete who wants a family, the support that they need to do that. It's becoming more common. And then also as sports science research, exercise science research, and coaching philosophy and all of that starts to take into account the female body, the pregnant body. I think that those things are going to be even more and more common, and we're going to see many more women running and performing in all of their sports for longer periods of time and having amazing breakthroughs because of it.
I hope so. Yeah. And just ladies, if you're listening to this, pregnancy doesn't have to end it. I mean, I'd like to think that I was in really good shape before I had my kids, and I'm in a different kind of fitness level now. Just different. It's just different. But I had all my I'm not done having my breakthroughs, so I don't. And same thing for age. That's the other thing. People are like, oh, at this age, fitness it starts declining, and I'm like, who says who? I mean, I know there's science to support it, but I mean, we shouldn't make it stop us.
Yeah, well, and one of the points that we make in Breakthrough, right, that there are so many other ways to have an incredible performance. And, if you run or compete in triathlon or whatever your sport is, if you compete for years and years and years, yeah, you may get to a point where you are not as good in some ways as you were before. But and there is science that there are age-related declines in endurance sports performance, but I think there are very few of us who have truly maximized every single thing that we could to get the absolute most out of our performance, even when we're younger, right? So I always think of it as there's an age curve, but then there's also a training curve, and it's not until you kind of have maxed this out and this starts to go down that you're definitely going to see your performances decrease. So there's always room for improvement, and there's always room for getting the best out of yourself for whatever situation you're in at the time. So.
For sure. That's a really good point to make. What have been some of just from your experiences, interviewing all these elite athletes as a runner yourself, what have you?
I mean, and maybe I sound like a broken record, but it is just this idea that setbacks are an inevitable part of sport, and that so often
it's okay.
Top athletes use those to fuel their greatest achievements. I've gotten to talk have been lucky enough to talk to so many incredible athletes who have overcome obstacles. I mean, Justine Galloway, for instance, I know she was on your show before, is a good friend of yours, but yeah, but people who are, maybe they can't do even if they can't do their sport in the way that they used to, they are still achieving incredible things. And just that mindset of being focused on what you can do instead of what you can't do. And no one's going to feel that way every day. And sometimes it takes time to get to that point. But so many athletes at every level, the ones who are doing amazing things have that sort of mindset, that growth mindset, that idea of taking obstacles and turning them into opportunities. So, I've interviewed so many amazing Paralympic athletes who have overcome a lot of obstacles to succeed in their sport. And then so many of them are activists who are pushing for more inclusion and better opportunities for people with disabilities. And I find that really compelling. And so I just think that, whatever level you're at, you can expect there to be some bumps along the road. But the best athletes seem to embrace those setbacks and really just transcend them. And so on my better days, that's what I aspire to do as a runner and a writer and a human. So
yeah. And I have to agree with you. I mean, I obviously haven't talked with as many of them as you have, but everyone that I meet that I'm like, oh, they're such an awesome, an amazing athlete. When you really sit down and talk to them, you realize they're just a human being with a gift, and two, that they experience setbacks and injuries and emotional, personal things like we all do. And they may not just, they may not post about it on Facebook every day, right? But they still experience them. And I find that even for myself, hearing those stories helps reset me too, and realize that it's not just because I'm doing something wrong as a runner or, a triathlete. So I think that helps all of us. We're not doing something wrong. Like you can do, and I think I've said this to so many people for different reasons. You can do everything right. You can do all the mobility exercises, all the PT, follow the training plan to a T. I mean, textbook, and something can happen. It is just life, right? And sometimes we don't know why. Like my injury, they really couldn't tell me what happened. It was probably genetics. I mean, disc stuff in your back is usually genetic. And to be honest, I still have to be pretty proactive about it, and it's not, it probably always will. It's just something that I'm dealt, right? So I think that it's good for people to remember you can do everything right, training plan wise, shoes, PT, mobility, strength training, eat the best. And all the stuff that you say in your book, we can do all of that, and something could still happen. So,
and I do think,
and that doesn't mean the book's wrong. That doesn't mean the book's wrong.
There is value
that you're
in
wrong.
trying to identify factors that may have contributed that you might be able to change. I mean, because right. So, but obviously you're totally right.
Yes.
I mean, the thing is that the reason that we do these sports, or one of the big reasons, is because we want to push our bodies and we want to be the best that we can be. And it's really, that's a fine line, and you don't really know where it is until,
and there's risk
sometimes until you cross it. So, I haven't interviewed an elite athlete, especially not an elite runner, who hasn't had an injury of some sort. And, so they deal with it just like we do. And it's, it's something that, again, you can use, especially if you take that opportunity to work on the mental side. And I think you really can come out of it a stronger athlete. I mean, it's bananas to me. I told you all of those athletes that we interviewed for Rebound, like more than 40 of them. I mean, almost every single one of them said, I hated the fact that I got injured. I wouldn't
All of them. Yeah.
wish it on anyone. I wouldn't want to go through it again. But I'm actually kind of glad that it happened, because I'm better now. And so I think, we can all aspire to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, I
Hmm.
when people ask me about my stuff, like the one, I mean, I still wish it would have happened, to be honest with you, but I will say
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
I definitely
Hmm.
learned to respect rest and recovery, which you talk about in your book, much more than I used to. Um, and I was like that person when that before everything happened to me, that where I
Hmm.
would
Hmm.
go for a 5 mile run at right one, I had one pace. I didn't do like up and down, right? I would run 5 miles at one pace, and then I would come in the house and do like plyometric,
Hmm.
like jump
Hmm.
lunges and
Hmm.
burpees and like all the crazy jumping exercises on top of my 5 mile run. So,
Yeah.
if you really want to know, probably what happens, that's probably what happens. No,
Hmm.
I didn't do that during that training block, but I used to,
Hmm.
like 20-year-old Mandy did that.
Hmm.
So, I don't do that anymore because I know that's not smart. So you do learn, like that is one thing I did learn is like you guys are listening to this and you're a 22-year-old athlete who doesn't believe that like
Hmm.
periodizing your training and resting appropriately and taking your rest days or your active recovery days, running at an easy pace when you're supposed to
Hmm.
run at an easy pace,
Hmm.
getting enough sleep,
Hmm.
drinking enough water, all this stuff we preach, it'll come. Or
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
all stuff is
Absolutely.
definitely stuff that you start to really appreciate it when you've gone through something, for sure. So, um, I'm going to ask you, and you may not be able to answer this, but I'm just curious. Do you have a favorite? I don't want to say favorite. Most surprising. Like, has there been someone you've interviewed, and talked to through your writing that
Hmm.
has been
Hmm.
surprising to you? That like maybe
Yeah.
was what you didn't expect.
Hmm. Um,
That's why I want to say
that's a
favorite, because
great
we don't want to use
question.
favoritism.
Gosh, I mean,
Because
I've talked to
everyone's
so
different.
many incredible athletes. It's hard to narrow it down. I mean, I can name a couple stories I've worked on in the past year that have kind of stuck with me. I guess I recently wrote one for Runner's World about thyroid problems,
Yeah.
which are kind of an interesting issue for runners, because they're hard to diagnose in anyone, especially hypothyroidism. It's a little bit tricky. Hyperthyroidism is a little bit easier, but they have specific effects that can interfere with your training, but there's kind of a cloud over them because some coaches have been accused in the past of abusing thyroid medications as potential performance enhancers. So I talked to Jared Ward for that piece. He's recently diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, which is a type of hypothyroidism, and several other athletes who have coped with thyroid problems through the years. Gail Devers, who was an Olympian in the 80s, and Leah
Mm-hmm.
Fallon, who's a runner for the On Athletics Club, who has hypothyroidism also. So many of those athletes, I mean, whenever athletes share those kinds of challenges with me, I find that particularly impactful, and especially because some of them were kind of in the middle of it. Like Jared had just recently been diagnosed, and that's kind of where we jumped off, why we decided to write the article at that time, because there was a lot of confusion about it. And to hear like what his concerns were and why he was hesitant to take medication even though his doctor had diagnosed him with the condition, um, you know that that thought process. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say it was surprising, but I guess was illuminating to me. And I was really grateful to all of the athletes who talked to me for that article, and the experts too. It was a lot of work, but I hope
Mm-hmm.
that we helped shed some light on it. Because the other piece of it too is there are some
I bet.
you can get some abnormal thyroid levels with if you overtrain and underfuel. And so sometimes that is confusing to people, but it's really important for people to know that too, including doctors, because some physicians who don't treat a lot of athletes might see these abnormal readings and think, oh, they're hypothyroid, I'm just going to give them medication, when really what they're dealing with is REDS, which is, relative energy deficiency in sport, which if you don't start fueling properly is going to cause you a lot more problems in the long run. So that to me is something I've known about for a while, and it is surprising to me how few people know that is something that can affect it affects many,
that's
not just
fascinating.
elite athletes too, and it's really easy to unintentionally underfuel. So I, yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Fueling. We could have a whole conversation about fueling, right? I am as an athlete and a coach as well. I probably that's probably like the number one thing that I have to kind of preach at people the most is fueling properly for workouts. Like I said, that could be a whole nother hour. And everyone is individual. I won't sit here and say it's not like a, it's not black and white, but under fueling it for for workout fuel, run fuel is very common. And I'm sure you would agree. And oh boy, the people, you burn so many, you do not need to take or run a whole half marathon on no gels. I'm just going to leave it at that. Because you can get through it, but you're not going to feel good. And over time,
well, and it also,
if you do that repetitively, it is going to have.
Oh no, it's okay. I was talking over you
said.
there.
So,
no, we have,
you're, and
I'm sure,
are,
you say, you see this with your athletes all the time, and we have a chapter in
Go
Breakthrough
ahead.
about fueling too.
Sorry.
And I'm not a dietitian, I'm not an expert, but we talked to one, Starla Garcia, for the book, and she the way she puts it is you have people who train so hard. But then they're just leaving this on the table, this performance enhancing thing, right? It's going to help you perform better, but people are so scared of it because of, various reasons, diet culture and sort of myths that have been perpetuated about weight loss always leading to faster times, that it's just it's a really complex issue, but she works with athletes and tries to help them kind of break that down and see that, okay, this is an opportunity for me to do better. So
it is.
So I'm very glad that you share that with your athletes too.
And I think I'm glad. And what you said about I wasn't aware of the thyroid levels.
Yes.
Thankfully, I've never had abnormal thyroid levels come back on my tests. And I've had it tested several times, part of the post-pregnancy thing. But other blood levels can come back abnormal as well for athletes that aren't because of a health thing. And I think that is, again, not a doctor here or anything, but I know from personal experience, I had one yearly test that came back where my liver enzymes were elevated, and we did a retest, and later figured literally read online that if you get your blood drawn the day after a hard workout or the day of a hard workout, that is very common. So nobody had told me that. So I think I had done a hard workout the night before, and I fasted because I had to, because they did my cholesterol and all that, and lo and behold, they were elevated. So the next time I didn't do that, and they were normal. So, just little things. It's not always that. So I don't want you guys to if you're listening to this, totally ignore those abnormal. Always go through your doctor. But thank goodness I mentioned to my doctor that I was that I was training for, I think, an Ironman. I think it was during my Ironman block. So they were like, oh, well, maybe we should retest and don't work out hard for 24 hours beforehand. I was like, oh. Okay, that's kind of hard for me because now I have to plan it around, going to training plates, blood draw, right? So, but just so you guys know, it can be. They had another thing on me where they, I had a, I can't remember how it came
Mm-hmm.
about, but long story short,
Mm-hmm.
they did a chest X-ray. That was it was. They did a chest X-ray. This is years
Mm-hmm.
ago because I had
Mm-hmm.
I had like a chest cold, right? And they thought my heart looked big, so they thought it was
Mm-hmm.
enlarged. I went through an
Mm-hmm.
echo, an EKG, all of that. It was just enlarged, like an athlete's like heart is what they call
Mm-hmm.
it. Where like I again, this is so layman's terms, where
Mm-hmm.
like because I do so much aerobic training, the blood efficiency is much volume is greater than somebody who doesn't. So again, that's not something that you want to ignore. You still want to get it checked out. I did. I went and got it checked out by a cardiologist, and I was fine and cleared to do
Yeah, and
whatever I
it's a
want to
great
do. But
argument for
long story short, we're
yeah, and it's a
complicated
great argument,
creatures.
as you mentioned, for telling your physicians that you are an
So it's
athlete.
a
And
good thing. I think
ideally,
it's interesting, the thyroid
we
thing.
say this in Rebound and we say this to athletes. I know it's really hard sometimes, but if you can find physicians who are athletes themselves or have experience treating athletes, that's really helpful because there are things like that. Like there are just also things like, for instance, there's a certain kind of antibiotics that fortunately aren't prescribed all that much anymore, but they're called fluoroquinolones, and they have risk of tendon damage if you take them. And if you are an athlete and you take them, that risk can last actually for months or years after you stop taking them. And so it's really important for athletes to know that, number one. And then for two, like for your healthcare team to know that this is your activity level, so that they can, know to avoid that kind of thing and also interpret your test results correctly.
Yeah, they tried to give me one. Yeah, they tried to give me one of
Oh my
those
gosh. And I
antibiotics
just wrote an
when I
article
had a
about
UTI,
UTIs, and I mentioned it in that article, even though all the
and it
doctors I
was
talked
two
to
weeks
said
before a
those are
marathon.
not, you're not supposed to prescribe them for UTIs, but doctors
Yeah,
don't, some
yeah,
doctors don't know that apparently. So I'm very glad that you knew that.
they did. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know this is a? Do you know the only reason I did, Cindy, is
Mm-hmm.
because it was 2 weeks before a marathon and
Mm-hmm.
I had symptoms. So I took myself to urgent care. I wasn't ever sick. So I like never went to the doctor. And I was kind of freaking out when they told me I had a UTI.
Mm-hmm.
And I texted my coach
Mm-hmm.
at the time and she's like, what antibiotics do they want to give you?
Mm-hmm.
She knew because her husband's a doctor. That is the only reason I would have not known, which is actually kind of scary. So when I
Mm-hmm.
told her, and she goes, ask them if you can have something else because of the risk for like Achilles ruptures and blah, 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 blah. So I asked, and they were like, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like once I mentioned it, then they were like, sure. And I can't have penicillin because I'm allergic. So it is kind of a more complicated thing to find me an antibiotic sometimes. But yeah, I would not have known. So that, I mean, well, I know we kind of went off on a tangent, but yes, as athletes, definitely always mention to your physicians
Oh,
and your
yes, we
care
could.
team in general that you are, even if you don't consider
Mm-hmm.
yourself an athlete, we could probably have another conversation about that. But so many people,
Mm-hmm.
right? That I had a hard time with it for a long time. I wasn't a collegiate runner. I wasn't a high school runner. And so it took me a very long time to say, I'm an athlete. I'm a runner. I'm a triathlete, because
Mm-hmm.
if you're not professional, you're not getting paid to do this, you're not in the elite crowd. Guys,
Mm-hmm.
if you do your
Mm-hmm.
sport, whatever it may be, on a regular basis, you are an athlete. So that's all I have to say about that. And but tell them what you do, whatever it is. Tell them what you do on a regular basis. And the endurance sport, even if it's not an endurance sport, sprinters work just as hard. You'd be surprised how
Mm-hmm.
much a swimmer who
Mm-hmm.
does what is it, like the
Mm-hmm.
200-meter IM in the pool, which takes them a total of like 2 minutes, how
Mm-hmm.
much they swim. So
Mm-hmm.
always
Mm-hmm.
tell your providers. And I'm big on finding people that are athletes
Mm-hmm.
if I can. It's sometimes hard, but I try. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, big thing. So well, I think we could probably wrap up. I could sit here and talk to you all day, but do you have anything you would like
No, I
our
mean, I am just
listeners to
grateful for the
know
opportunity to chat with you. It was
before
lovely
we
talking
kind of
to
close
you.
things
And
out for
yeah, I
today?
mean, I have, you can read my articles in runner's world. I have a website, cindykuzma.com. And I have links to my articles there and my books and my podcasts and all that. And always encourage any injured athletes, especially to look us up, to join the Facebook group. It's, in my opinion, one of the few places I like to hang out on Facebook these days. It's a really supportive, wonderful community. And it's there for you anytime you need it. And podcast too, and Rebound, which is now available as an audiobook that Carrie reads. And her voice is lovely and soothing. So those are the things. And we have a website, injuredathletesclub.com too, is another website where you can find information about all of that work. So, yeah.
That's good. And I will link all of that stuff in our show notes so you guys can click on them. If you want to find Cindy, want to buy one of the books, I highly recommend both of them. And if you guys are curious, in the Breakthrough book, there is actually, there are recipes in here. There is a full training plan in the back that I'm assuming came from Neely. And it has 5K, 10K, half marathon, and marathon training plans in there. They're very, as a coach, I think they look very solid. And she won't, I mean, she's Neely. She's not gonna steer you wrong. But there's even pace charts in here. So, for like, if you guys are familiar with any of the online running calculators, it's very similar to that, but in paper. So you can just like find your most recent race time and see kind of where those pace charts are. So there is a little bit of everything in this book. And even very, therapy-like goal sheets that make my little therapy heart pitter-patter, where you list out barrier goals, the steps. I mean, it's so like SMART goal format. It totally looks like a treatment plan. So that I said, it makes my heart pitter-patter. And like she mentioned, there is a runner profile, if you're kind of a athlete geek like me, where you get sucked into YouTube videos on all of the athlete stories, you will like this book, because there's one in every chapter. So highly recommend both. They'll both be in there. The Injured Athletes Club on Facebook. I'm still in there as well. And the podcast, podcasts are like the thing now. So we're trying to break away, as my 14-year-old reminds me that like people under 20 aren't on Facebook. She likes to tell me this on a regular basis. So that's where podcasts and YouTube come in, right? So we'll put all that in there. I encourage my listeners to check out her stuff if you are dealing with an injury, which if you haven't yet, you're very fortunate. And if you are continuing down your athletic path, no matter how new, novice, or elite you are, it's highly likely that you'll have some sort of injury at some time. And I just want to say, it'll be okay. And there is another side. We can't promise what that'll look like, but I can tell you that most of the time you can get back to your sport. There obviously are exceptions, but, if you guys listened to my episode a few episodes ago with Justine, who Cindy talked to, she found her way back to her sport. It doesn't look the same as it did before, but she still runs backwards, which to me shows more strength than anything I've ever gone through. So, just remember, it may not feel like it, and that's okay that it doesn't feel like it right now. You can always reach out to me too. I'm always willing to listen to people, because I understand too. It's once you've gone through an injury, you get it. You just get it, So you feel for people who've going through that, because you can relate personally. So, So that's all I got to say. But thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure. I could talk to you all day
Stay
about
tuned.
all sorts of things. So we will maybe have you back on again sometime. If you write another book, I'll have you back on. So, but thanks, guys, and stay tuned and check in all the show links. But thanks for listening.